Hello, and welcome to this week's episodes of Mindset Mentoring for Athletes, Parents, and Entrepreneurs. I'm your host, Coach Chuck. In this episode, we dive into the transformative world of holistic well-being with Robyn Harris, the renowned wild well-being alchemist. Discover how integrating your body, mind, and spirit can dramatically enhance your life, turning scars into powerful lessons of resilience and growth. So stay tuned for that.
According to the CDC in 2023, over 10 million teenagers reported experiencing persistent feelings of sadness and hopelessness. 10 million. And it's not just teenagers. Over 51 million adults struggle with mental health challenges every single year. Parents, this isn't just statistics. It's our children. It's us. And it's a wake-up call. But here's the thing. Knowledge and awareness is a first step to change. Yet the most important knowledge, the kind that can truly transform lives, is rarely taught. It's not about memorizing facts or getting perfect grades. It's about learning how to train your mindset. At the Unstoppable Mindset Masterclass, we'll teach you and your family how to take control, how to overcome limiting beliefs, tackle financial stress, and rise above the challenges that hold you back. You'll gain tools to build unshakable confidence, foster resilience and grit to handle life's toughest moments, and turn habits into rituals that drive lasting change. Imagine the relief of watching your teenager face life with hope instead of hopelessness. Imagine equipping them and yourself with the mindset to not just survive but thrive. Visit unstoppablemindsetmasterclass.com and register to take the first step towards your transformation.
Welcome back, and I would like to welcome Robyn Harris, a visionary in the realms of holistic well-being and personal transformation. With over a decade of experience, Robyn has mastered the art of turning life's adversities into opportunities for growth. As a creator of the wild well-being approach, she empowers individuals to engage fully with life by embracing their wonderful, intuitive, loving dance. Her unique blend of energy healing and traditional wisdom has guided countless individuals toward a joyful, fulfilling life. Today, she shares her insights on how embracing our whole selves can lead to profound joy and freedom. So let's welcome Robyn Harris to the show. Welcome, Robyn.
Thank you. It's great to be here. Thank you.
And thank you for joining us from the UK. So
Yes, from Wales.
It's an honor to have you. Let's just kind of jump right into this. And, I'd like to have my guests kind of give us a little bit of kind of a broad stroke of their background, of kind of their life's journey a little bit, and then we can kind of dive more into the specifics. So why don't you kind of fill us in on a general introduction of who you are and where you come from?
Thank you. Well, I'm originally from Northern Ireland, and I think my story probably begins there because I was born right at the beginning of the Troubles, and so that had quite an impact on my life growing up, as I share in my book. But then years later, I was in a place where I was feeling really hopeless, that I had lots of little health niggles, things going on, nothing dramatic, but at the same time, I just felt I couldn't change, I couldn't move forward, nothing in my life seemed to be, I couldn't shift anything, I couldn't make it better. So I tried the traditional routes. I went to the doctor, I got prescribed medication, I got referred for counselling, and they didn't work for me either. So I decided to set out to find if it was possible to change, because at that point I didn't even know if it was possible. And through that journey, that's what helped me to create Wild, and it completely transformed my life. So now when I see people where I was, that's what fuels me really to share what I've learned, in the hope that it'll inspire and support other people, not necessarily to do what I did, because I think every person's journey is very unique and individual to them, but that it is possible, and that we can find the resources, a lot of them are within ourselves, and that we can find the tools and tailor the tools, create our own toolkit to take back ownership of our own well-being and our journey, and then to become the people that we were born to be, our own unique self, and to allow that light to shine and to allow us to share our gifts with others.
Yeah, thank you. Having lived through experiences, not myself, but the tragedy of cancer in my family, and there is so much about, and we're learning it scientifically about this connection, mind, body, spirit, right? How they all intertwined. Can you talk a little bit more about what that moment was for you that went from just experiencing it to now saying, oh my, I need to share this with other people, that kind of thing. Can you kind of maybe talk a little bit more about that kind of moment on how you realized that this was bigger than just what you were experiencing, that you had to kind of share it with people?
I think it started off with that experience of seeing how much of a difference it made in my own life, seeing how it was totally transformative. And it sounds small and simple because it started off with me reading a quote that we don't see the world. Hang on, let me get this right. We don't see things as they are, we see them as we are. So it's our perception that determines how we see the world and therefore how we experience the world. And Wayne Dyer said, when we change the way we look at things, the things we look at change. And Bruce Lipton said, the moment we change our perception is the moment we rewrite the chemistry of our body. And that had a huge impact on me. I realized that actually I did have the ability, the power within myself to make changes, and that would change my world. And then having actually experienced that, lived it, practiced it, and experienced the changes that it made for me, then that made me passionate to support others. Because, if you see somebody who's in that position where you were, and maybe that position was very painful and uncomfortable, and you just want to show that other person, it's okay. You can change this. You have the power, the agency within you to make the changes, because I've done it and there's nothing special about me. But maybe if I share my story, that will inspire you. It will help you to believe that you can change, and to show you that it's simple steps that maybe sound too simple, but it's just those steps taken consistently, and that will effect a huge transformation in your life.
Yes, one of the first things I talk about in the kind of the process of this taking control is taking responsibility for where you're at, right? And the whole, you said this, mentioned the word compassion and all, but learning to have compassion for yourself and then reframe, the whole perception thing, right? It's amazing how much the stories we tell ourselves really influence how we react to everything. And we don't necessarily need to tell the story we've been telling ourselves for years. And that realization for people can be very profound. It's it's something that sometimes I think there's some skepticism out there, and particularly in the Western world, about how you know, some of the mind body connection really plays out. Do you find that to be the case too? I mean, it seems to me, I tend to see some of this kind of like, I don't know, what is it that you really do kind of thing. Can you talk about that at all? Do you find that to be an issue as well?
Sometimes, yes, with some people, but I think generally people are beginning to be more aware of the whole mind body spirit connection. It's a phrase that is used much more commonly now. People will talk about the mind body spirit, or the body mind. So I think there is more of an awareness, and there are events that are called mind body spirit shows, mind body spirit events. So I think it's creeping into our vocabulary. And once it's in our vocabulary, then there is a greater awareness and it does start to shift our perception. But I loved what you said about our story. And I've been listening to Brene Brown's books recently, where she talks about the importance of story and some other books as well. But basically, they're saying that as human beings, we are wired for story. We are pattern making beings. So we like to be able to join up the dots. The problem with that is that we are so wired for story and so wired for making a pattern and completing that pattern that even if we don't have the full information, we will make assumptions in order for that pattern, that story to be completed, even if it's not correct. And we get a little boost, a little dopamine hit, a little kind of excitement when that pattern completes and that story is rounded off and finished, even if it's not accurate, even if it's not correct, if it's just based on assumptions. And unfortunately, we will revert to our old patterns and our old stories, like you were saying, those stories that we've been telling ourselves that maybe they aren't serving us, and it would be good to reframe them and change them. But if we don't, and if we're not really being conscious with how we're interacting and reusing those stories, we're effectively recreating and just having that as our belief system, the lens through which we see and therefore experience the world. And then we wonder why does this keep happening for me? Why do I never move forward? Why am I always experiencing this problem or that problem? And to some degree, greater or lesser degree, it could be because of the stories we're telling ourselves that keep falling into those old patterns. And so that's how it plays out in our life. And you talked about as well about responsibility. And I used to, when I was younger, feel a great weight of responsibility. But now I've reframed that to be responsibility, in terms of I'm not responsible for everything. I'm responsible for me and for my thoughts and my beliefs and how I interact with the world. But I can take responsibility in that because I can choose which thoughts I engage with, which beliefs I want to keep hold of, and my actions, and therefore how I create my experience and my future.
Yeah, that's beautiful. And you know, the stories that we do tell ourselves that we fill in can come from places of love, right? But yet, you're trying to protect somebody, you're trying, and you, as individual, can take that story you heard and it can become a limiting, experience. And I'm not just talking necessarily health wise. I worked with a college athlete who, in the work I was doing with him, we discovered that when he was really quite young, the message that he got is you can't let people think they're better than you, right? He's competing at a pretty young age. And this idea of not letting them think they're better than him became the story of they are better than me. So he was a good athlete, but by the time he got to college, he was just average, even though his athleticism was definitely like tops. But once we removed that and we changed the story, he was a pitcher, baseball, and he didn't lose another game the last 2 years, and he got a chance to play minor league baseball for 3 years. It was all because we changed the story, and the impact on our health can be profound as well. So, how do you mentioned turning scars into stepping stones and growth. So, can you talk about so many people have emotional scars that they hold on to. Can you talk about how you go about to help them reframe that? I mean, I loved what you said when you mentioned reframing your experience. Can you talk about what that process is a little bit?
There are many elements, and it will depend on the individual and on where they are. But I think one of the tools that I use, which is very helpful in this kind of situation, is to ask the person I'm working with to write their timeline. And they can go back right to the very early days, even their birth or before their birth, because a lot of, like you're saying, the stories that come into our lives are family stories. So we might have inherited them from our parents and their parents. But to go back as far as they can and to write their timeline, because that helps us to see what we have been through, to really acknowledge and appreciate what we've been through in our lives. I've worked with people who've written their timelines, and it's been the first time that they've truly acknowledged to themselves, I went through that, I survived that. That was a strength that I survived that. It was challenging, but I came through it and it's made me stronger. So I think that's one step for us to really see and appreciate, because sometimes in our stories we dismiss things, we minimize things. Oh, I don't have it as bad as somebody else. Their situation is much worse than mine, so I shouldn't complain about mine, for example. And so I dismiss it and I push it under the carpet in a sense. But in doing that, I am taking away the fact that that was a strength. That showed I have resilience. That showed I have courage. That showed I have abilities that if I'm not acknowledging that part of my story, I'm taking away from myself. So I think writing a timeline, acknowledging what we've been through, acknowledging the strength and the courage that we were called to show in that situation, and to really appreciate it, to sit with it and acknowledge, rather than just, oh, it didn't really matter, and dismiss it and brush it off, because that's an important part of who we are. And to acknowledge it and celebrate it helps us to then be able to draw on it again in the future.
Yeah, a couple times you threw in the word timeline in your answer there, and it's amazing. I mean, we are a product of our memories, right? And I use timeline therapy techniques a lot in the stuff I do, and being able to help people, go back into their past, because so much of things we carry forward is from our past, and do all this reframing and letting go and resolving these emotions that they've held on to because it happened when they were so young they didn't really understand then, helping them get back in touch with those moments is incredibly powerful and freeing. I often liken it to, in the Christmas Carol, Scrooge with Miley the ghost, right? He's got this big long chain that we forge, that he says we're forging it every day through life. And that image really is kind of what we do with our emotions. And science is finally catching up to really show that when we hold on to those emotions, it's not good for us in all kinds of ways. It impacts our physical health, our mental health, our performance, our relationships, and in so many different ways. So, uh, that's part of what I really love doing is helping people kind of go back in and clean some of that up and reframe that. Now you have this wild approach, and I love the acronym. I was in education for so long. I think we love acronyms in education. So can you tell us a little bit about how this acronym kind of developed, and the imagery for me tells me that being out in the wild and nature and all this has an impact on us. So can you kind of share a little bit how this acronym came about and what it kind of means to you.
Absolutely. When I was going through my journey, I was seeing a therapist, and she said to me, "What do you enjoy?" And at that time, I was just in a place where I thought, nothing. I don't enjoy anything. My life is just thoroughly and utterly miserable. But from somewhere deep inside me, my inner child perhaps, came the word nature. So she set me a few challenges to walk out in nature every day and to transform the garden behind the house where I was living at the time into a wildlife garden, which I did. I made sure that I walked every day, and that some days were really hard. And at that time, I wasn't somebody who went outdoors every day, who thought that I wanted even to be outdoors on a regular basis. You know, I would open the curtains in the morning, and if it was grey and wet, I would think, no, I just want to stay indoors today. But this was the challenge that she'd set me, and I was determined to see if I could make change. So I did commit to walking every day. And some days I really didn't want to go, and I didn't feel better when I got back. And I thought, what's the point of all this? But over time, I could see that it was making a change. And then with the garden, transforming the garden and realizing I needed to work with nature, because there were things I wanted to plant, and I was determined I was going to have them in my garden, but the garden wasn't suited to those particular plants, and they would die. So then there were other plants that they just self-seeded everywhere. They went rampant. And through that whole process, I came to understand more about the seasons that we go through, the ebbs and the flows of life. Although we see every year the winter, the spring, the summer, the fall, the autumn, we have those in our own life as well, and in our energy levels. There's the day and night rhythm as well. So I came to understand more deeply that as humans, we are a part of nature. We are in nature, and nature is in us. We are like the whole body, mind, spirit concept. We are indivisible. You can't take us out of nature, and you can't take nature out of us. We live by the seasons. We live according to where we have grown up and where we have evolved. So I'm suited to the climate that I live in and the food around me, and somebody else living in a very different area and climate is more suited probably to what they have in their environment. And there are many different reasons for that. But I learnt more about all of that, and about how we are at our core. We are still wild. We are still genetically the same as the hunter-gatherer peoples of our ancestry. So all of these things, the day, the night, the seasons that we live in, they're still impacting on our bodies. So for example, in the UK, we've been in winter, and although we get all of this messaging around New Year, New You, and what are your New Year's resolutions? I've heard so many people saying that they're still feeling really tired and really sluggish and just want to be in hibernation, particularly when the days are grey and it's cold and it's wet. So to be gentle with ourselves and remember that we are still wintering in this area at this time of the year. And so wild was very much a part of my journey, and learning to rewild ourselves, to let go of, put down, put aside the conditioning that would try to make us conform to something that isn't natural for us. And I've also read Gabor Mate's book, The Myth of Normal, illness, healing, I can't remember, illness, something, and healing in a toxic culture. Sorry, I can't remember the exact title of the book. But he's talking about how the culture in which we live is not natural, is not following nature, and how we, as the hunter-gatherer that we still are genetically, would be living normally and naturally. So it can be toxic for us. And then in terms of the acronym, It is that perception, how we choose to see things. Do we choose to see things as the cynical, jaded adult, or with the eyes of wonder of a child? So that's W, the eyes of wonder. I is intuition, listening to our body, listening to that inner nature, rewilding ourselves, getting back to how we are designed to live in our genetic makeup and who we really are. L is loving ourselves as we are not, warts and all. Because I think so often we judge ourselves, we are critical of ourselves, rather than just, who am I? Who am I designed to be? How can I be that in flow with self compassion and self love and understanding and supporting myself? And then D is that dance that you were talking about earlier. I think if we could see life as a dance, as something we get to enjoy, bring joy into, and experience to its fullest, rather than seeing it as a slog or a competition or we're being judged, but just to feel the thrill of it and to get as much experience out of it as we possibly can. Because I think really that's our purpose at the end of the day, to determine, work out, who am I? Who am I here to be? What are my strengths? What are my gifts? And how can I bring those and share those with the world? How can I be the best that I can be? And also in doing that, uplift and support others to be the best that they can be.
Yeah, there's several things you said in there. I want to see if we can kind of unpack a little bit. But first, just kind of going back to this wild idea again, is I just finished reading the book Crisis and Comfort, and fascinating book about particularly in the more affluent countries, not just in the West, but we've become too comfortable, right? And I've thought about that actually quite a bit. It's like when you want to grow personally, um, it requires getting outside your comfort zone, but yet we don't like being uncomfortable. And in this book, he talked about the value of being out in the wild. And the more wild you can get out into, the better. There's been lots of studies showing that. And, my brother-in-law has been certified in the Japanese called it forest bathing, and I don't remember the Japanese word for it, but here I think they've kind of rebranded it a little bit with a different name, but he's got certified to do that, to help people go out into the wild, out into the forests, and absorb and through quiet and just contemplative practices, just get in touch with nature, and the impact that that has on mind, body, spirit is quite profound. I keep using that word, but it's the best word to kind of describe what they experience. Um, so all of that. When you talk about doing that and getting in touch with nature and all, I love that. One of the I work a lot with teenagers and all, and one of the things that kind of bothers me is even where I live in this area, there's a lot of opportunities to be outside in nature, in the woods. You know, we are in a more rural state, and even the largest city even has plenty of green space, and kids don't. And I just like when I was a kid, we'd be outside playing in the woods, like all the time. And I can't help but think that that contributes quite a bit to their, you know, what we are experiencing is a mental health crisis. So, and then the last thing you said, I'm going to kind of give you a chance in a moment, but it's related to what I just said, in that it's that kind of self identity. Who are we? And, I think that's every worldview answers kind of the question in some way, what's the meaning of life and what's our purpose. But I think, particularly with young people, they aren't. Your brain will answer that question somehow, but we need to give it more conscious thought to really kind of get in touch with that idea. And I think that's partly what you were kind of alluding to there at the end about understanding who we are. So how do you go about helping people with that? You know, what's are some of those strategies that people can use to really kind of get in touch with that congruency, lining up who they are and who they want to be? Do you want to talk to that for a second?
Sure. I run the workshop here in person, but also it's available as a webinar, which is all about how do we tune in and listen to ourselves. And the intuition that I mentioned earlier, for me, it's very much about listening to our body. Our body is so wise. Our body is unique to us. And so much of the information that we receive about the world around us and about the world within us comes from our senses, comes from how we feel, whether that's sensations in terms of our senses or it's emotions from within us. That's where we get our connection with ourselves, with the world around us, and we develop that picture of who am I and who am I within the world? What's my place in the world? Where do I fit within the world around me? And so for me, it's very much about beginning to understand what I call the body vocabulary. So tuning in and seeing, well, how do I know how I'm feeling? And what do the specific feelings, sensations, emotions that I experience tell me about how I'm feeling? What is it that lets me know I'm feeling good and things feel like they're running well and they're in alignment and I'm happy and I'm in the zone and it's all good? And what tells me when something feels off? Even if I can't put my finger on what that is and explain it, but maybe I can say, oh, I got this sensation in my body. I can feel that there's a tingling sensation, or I'm just, a friend of mine calls it the hunger. I'm just feeling like there's a need in me that isn't being met right now. I'm maybe feeling my heart rate has gone up, or my breathing is shallower. I'm not feeling so able to breathe deep down into my lungs. Maybe I'm not feeling entirely safe in this situation, because it's so important for us to feel safe. And in order to be able to tune into what is authentically me and to be curious and to be compassionate to myself, I need to feel safe. And that's safe physically, emotionally, and psychologically. So in this workshop webinar, that's something that I discuss with people, and I invite them to get curious about, invite them to tune into their body and see what it's telling them and start learning that body vocabulary for themselves, so that they can then use that. It supports our emotional intelligence, our emotional literacy, which is so great for our well-being, particularly obviously our mental well-being, to know, well, where am I on that scale? Are things going well for me at the moment? Great. How do I maintain that? Or are things not going so well, which happens regularly because life is always throwing us curveballs, shaking things up and changing things, and we then have to re-find our balance and our harmony. But noticing when I'm feeling off, noticing what's telling me that I'm feeling off, being able to identify that emotion and the need behind that emotion, so that I can then find a healthy way to address that and support myself and help myself get back to where I feel good. And knowing where I feel good and what that feels like helps me to know where I need to go to get there, because we can't get to a destination unless we know where it is. So it's that really helping people to really tune in and get that level of understanding of themselves.
One of the things I tell parents too is um, learning to ask better questions of your children or what have you can be really a huge process. And sometimes, I mean, as a coach, that's often what I'm doing. I'm asking lots of questions to just help the person begin to pull things out, think about it maybe a little bit differently. And that very process can be part of the process of letting go and change. I mean, I'll never forget a student I had in one of the last years. I was working in the public school setting, and there's a real question whether he was really the right student for the program that we were running at the time. He had some pretty serious behavioral issues, and typically with kids with those behavioral issues, they aren't quite ready for where we were uh, in the model that we were operating under. But he came in, and within the first month, a lot of these behaviors were coming up, and we were having discussions about, all right, he's probably not ready for this. And there's pretty close to being able to like say, no, he's got to go somewhere else. And his mother just said one thing to him, said, do you remember Johnny, this other student that this student used to complain about back in elementary school, and how much of a bully he was, how disruptive all these things that he didn't like at all. And the kid said to his mom, yeah, I remember him. She said, well, you're becoming him. And that literally totally changed him. There was a lot of work we still had to do, but we saw immediate impact on his behavior from that one simple reframe and statement. Um, so I constantly encourage parents who sometimes can get a little overwhelmed themselves, if they're dealing with a child who's depressed or anxious all the time, and it can wear on us. So you got to take care of yourself, because if you don't, you can't really help your child. And then there's some skills that we can learn to, asking better questions and trying to reframe things and all of that. So,
And I think for
yeah,
parents are coaches, really, aren't they? And also, when we are a parent and we have maybe a child that's struggling, that can bring up stuff for us. So I often think of reparenting ourselves, reparenting that inner child that maybe didn't get what they needed. And it's not pointing fingers of blame at any parents or their parents or their parents, but these things do come down the line. But we, that's part of the empowerment, can then go, right, it's going to stop here. I'm going to find a way to reframe this, reparent myself, whatever it takes. And I love the dreaded drama triangle, and that then can be converted into the empowerment dynamic. You were talking about the coach, which the other side of that, the flip side of that, is the victim. So the victim, the rescuer, and the persecutor on the drama triangle, and we can change that. I was very much in victimhood. That was part of what had got me into the situation where I then made the choice to start my journey. So for me, it was learning, how can I coach myself? And I think that's one of the great things coaches and parents can do for their children, their teenage children, is to be a coach for them, to role model that, and to encourage them then to ask those questions of themselves so they become their own coach. And I think that is so empowering, and that will change things going forward. It won't just change it for that family, for that child, it'll change things right the way into the future.
yeah. Um, Something I want to kind of build on a little bit there is that, um, going forward too, right? So we try to help the parents and the kids, and some of those rules that we operate under unconsciously that we picked up because that's the way our family kind of did things aren't necessarily the ideal way to deal with stress or whatever. And we don't even really think about, oh yeah, that's how I'm dealing with it, and our kids pick that up. So there's that synergy that goes on within family dynamics that we kind of need to work with. But once we've kind of done some of this work, and parents have done the work, the kids, what have you, it's now going forward, and trying to help them. And I tell a story lots of times because it's an emotional story for me, but it's very symbolic. Um, After my wife passed away of cancer, we were having the memorial service, and we knew that we wanted to have a fairly good sized group come afterwards to our house. And my wife and I were not gardeners, but we liked to have a garden, but we just never really took the responsibility. So we would plant some plants, but never really care for it. Well, there's one spot in our backyard that I was like, no, this is where we had always really wanted our garden. And I'm not a gardener, don't know anything about it, but my sister is. So, she gave me a hand, but we weeded it all out. She would point out some of the things that, oh, that's a wildflower. That could be really nice here, don't pull that up. Put in the soil, did all the things, and the garden was beautiful. It was beautiful. And it lasted, through the fall. Winter came, and during that winter, I had an opportunity to change my living situation. So I left the house to the kids who took it over. Three of my kids are still living there. They had a couple roommates. And I remember going back, and I'm not that far away, so I do go back fairly regularly. But it was late spring, early summer, and I walked out in the backyard, and it was like a punch in the gut. Here was my beautiful garden overrun by weeds. And it was like, but it was my responsibility. It wasn't the kids. It was I needed to take responsibility for that garden. And once you clean it up and your work's not done, you need to keep weeding it all the time. And that's means going forward, we have to take care of ourselves, right? So there's that metaphor idea of we've got to take responsibility going into the future and keep weeding our garden, because we all have a beautiful garden. We're just waiting to bloom. So are there things that you try to help your clients or people do going forward so that the garden doesn't get overrun by weeds?
I think it is, like you say, sharing stories like that illustrate the importance of being conscious and ongoing action, ongoing steps that we take. And that's why, as well, I was saying earlier that it's about those small, simple, consistent steps. And I think as well, I encourage people to make it fun. So when I said about enjoy your life, bring joy into your life, it's actually a choice. Rather than sitting around waiting for happiness to happen, because by and large, that's not how it works. It's creating that happiness, it's bringing that joy in. And when we can bring in a sense of joy and fun to those small, simple steps, they start to build their own momentum, and we just want more of them because we're enjoying them. And so that keeps us doing them. So bringing joy in, making it a conscious thing as well, making sure that we understand that when we are conscious, then we take these actions, we take responsibility, and we take these actions. But sometimes we slip back into those old default behaviors because we're not being conscious. And that can be for many different reasons. It can be that one of those curveballs has come and taken us out of balance and harmony again, or we're feeling very depleted. Maybe we're exhausted, we've been working really hard, or something has happened in our life. So it's taking the time to do some simple self-care exercises. I share a list on my YouTube channel, which includes things like breathing exercises, grounding exercises. I think they're so important because they bring us back to our body, to that wise wisdom within us that I was mentioning earlier. So I think when we are being conscious, being centered, being grounded, then if we choose to, we remember to take that responsibility. We remember to make our choices consciously, and also because we are aware that when we do that, the outcome feels better. So, like you were saying about living in a comfortable society, and that's not actually beneficial for our mental well-being and health in the long run if we are not making those conscious choices and we're not taking care of ourselves. It can lead us down rabbit holes. But if we remember that making conscious choices, bringing in fun, doing the things we enjoy, taking those simple self-care steps, it feels good. We feel like we've got that resilience. That was what I was looking for in my journey that I wasn't getting from the taking medication or going to a counselor. I didn't feel I had agency. I didn't feel that I was learning the tools that would help me when things went a bit pear-shaped in the future. But now that I have that sense of responsibility, that knowledge that, yeah, I can do this, whatever it is, no matter how big and scary it is, I might get thrown for a while, but I can find my way back. I know how to step into my power again, my ability, my responsibility, and to get back onto that feeling of balance and harmony where I know I've got this. It's not always easy, and I don't want to give the impression that I've got it all sorted. But the fact that I know I haven't, but I know that I can get myself back to that grounded, centered, balanced, harmonious place means I'm not worried in the way that I used to be. And that's what I want to share with others. That's what I want to let people know is possible, and hopefully to inspire them to find that for themselves.
Yeah, I wholeheartedly agree with that. One of the things I talk about is being your own life coach, right? So hopefully, when you are done with me, I've given you enough skills, helped you build the habits. That's one of the things is a significant part of one of my programs is helping them build some real life habits. And then for the most part, when life knocks you down, because it will, you can get up, you've got the skills, brush yourself off, kind of bring yourself back into balance. But there are times still that sometimes something really hits you hard and you really get stuck in the level of the problem, and you need a fresh set of eyes to kind of, you know, help ask the right questions or what have you. But um, one of the reasons I love working with teenagers is like what a what a great time to be teaching them these lessons when their job is to learn. And we don't do a good job with that. We don't do a good job societally helping teach the skills and the thinking processes and all that to understand what that balance is. And boy, if you can get that at a young age, um, obviously it doesn't prevent storms from happening in your life. It doesn't prevent the weeds from sprouting up, but you can recognize them and see them and pull them out before they really begin to choke things off. So, um, you know, I I think that's like you. That's kind of the message we're trying to share, right? Is
Yeah, and I often talk about weeds and about how life gets messy, and that's okay. Sometimes I think that we're afraid of the messy, but the messy is just a part of life. And again, going back to perception and how we choose to look at things, we can look at it as messy and tangled and overgrown and horrible, or we can just look at it as that's nature doing her thing. And if you pull back, often there is a beauty in it. It may not be how you want it in your garden. So you can go in and you can prune and you can trim and you can support the ones that the plants or the beliefs that you want to encourage. And I think you're talking about teens and how valuable it is to work with teenagers and give them those self-coaching, self-supporting tools going forward. But also I think it must be so rewarding working with teens, whether you're a parent or a teacher or a coach, because teens in that phase of life, they're there to ask all those questions. It's like our brain goes through several particular phases in life where it is just there to question. So, like the terrible twos, we talk about the terrible twos. It's just that 2 year old or whatever age it's at asking questions, pushing the boundaries, seeking to learn more, seeking to explore more about who they are as an individual. And it's the same when we get to being a teenager. Again, we want to explore, we want to find out what is it to be me and what is it also to be a part of my group, because that's so important. We are social beings. We look for that connection, that deep, profound connection. So teenagers as well sometimes have a reputation for acting out and having behaviors, but those behaviors are just communication. And their whole thing when you're a teenager is to push back and to challenge. And for us who are maybe a little bit older, that can be quite, it can feel threatening. It can feel like it's pushing our boundaries. But if we could just get curious as well as the teenager getting curious and just, well, what's it like for you from your perspective, and be open to that and welcoming of that. And I think that's all about feeling safe in ourselves. So it's getting back to that sense of safety, physically, emotionally, and psychologically. And unless we're in that position, it's very difficult for us to ask those questions, whether as an adult of our teen or if you're a teen, asking it of yourself and your situation, maybe even your coaches, your parents, your teachers.
Yeah, you and I could probably keep talking and talking about this subject. We are coming near the end of our time. You have workshops. I know you've mentioned. Are they all virtual workshops, or are they like combination virtual and in-person stuff, or what are some of the options that people in my audience might have for kind of tuning in and finding out a little more about what you're teaching?
I run my workshops either face to face or online. So there are virtual options that way. Also, I have a 3 day workshop, which I've just converted into an online self study course with support as well. So through Zoom, like a Zoom call for questions, answers, support. So, yeah, either of those, because I love to work with people face to face, but also one of the benefits of the pandemic recently was that we are now able to connect with people all the way across the globe. And that fascinates me as well, seeing lots of different perceptions and perspectives and cultures and that richness of our diversity. So, yes, either way. And if anybody wants to know more, then I'm more than happy to have a chat and to answer any questions they may have.
Fabulous. And your book has been in the background there, so people have the title. And is that QR code linked to your website, or was that connected to the book?
That QR code takes people to one of my business cards. I have electronic business cards, and that one is specifically about the book.
All right, fabulous. Well, thank you for joining us. It was a pleasure. And for all of you out there, I'm sure there's so much information there. We're really both Robyn and I have that kind of mission of trying to help people get that balance between the mind, body, spirit, and when you do that, bring things into balance, you're really fulfilling your potential. It's very easy to get thrown out of balance, and the statistics today, particularly in the United States, are really becoming overwhelming with the number of kids and families who are struggling with their anxiety, depression, just stress related. I am beginning a series of master classes. It begins this month. So actually, by the time this airs, the first master class will be just like 2 days after this probably airs, but I will be having them the fourth Thursday of every month. And what I've done with these master classes is really taken a whole lot of the content of my core training programs about shifting mindset and putting it together in a series of master classes. And typically people pay me a lot of money for my trainings, and I'm giving most of the content away essentially for free. If people want a VIP ticket where you can get a strategy session with me, which those of you who've been listening know that I've been actually, anybody who's been listening, I've been giving those away as well. That's how passionate I am about getting the word out. So I would encourage you guys to enroll in that masterclass. It's unstoppable mindset masterclass.com. And you can always find it at coachchuck360.com. Anybody who would like to learn more from me and maybe even take advantage of that free strategy session at coachchuck360.com, go to the contact me icon and then send me a text with your first name, last name, best email, and say podcast gift. And I'll send you a unique link that will bypass the payment, and we can have a 30-minute strategy session where I will ask all kinds of questions, give you kind of a blueprint, a roadmap on what you might want to do to kind of reach these goals that you've indicate during that conversation. So once again, that's coachchuck360.com. And until the next time, live life joyfully and live it with a gusto.